Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. As always, thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it very much. This week I'm interviewing Kim Kid Curry. Now, this is an amazing conversation. You know, I say Kim Kid Curry. That kid is in quotation marks because Kim Curry was a DJ for a great many years. Started out in Colorado, just babysitting a radio station. We'll talk about what that means for the church services on Sunday. Made it all the way up to, you know, the hot battles in Miami between top 40 radio stations and some of the biggest radio stations in the country, between Miami and Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Spent some time in Texas. Just an amazing career in radio as one of really the biggest radio DJs out there. Definitely in the 80s and 90s, a huge force to be reckoned with when it came to DJ Kid Curry. So I think you're going to enjoy that part of the story about how he became a top DJ, how he managed radio stations and made them, huge, how he kind of mingled with some of the biggest stars of the day, between Casey and the Sunshine Band in the early days to Diddy later on, and Tupac and all of these people. He did get out of radio in the early 2000s, not before some other amazing conversations. We're going to talk about how in the 80s the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, was listening to his show, and the picture framer in the White House. It's an interesting story. I'm not even going to go into it because I want you to listen to it, and it kind of goes into a story about his next phase, because he actually went to the White House and had an issue there, which he'll tell you. But what happens is in 2005, Kim was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis. And we're going to talk about that journey he's been on since then. You know, he's had a time where he was kind of rapidly, having issues. He was fading fast when it comes to his abilities. MS is something that kind of takes away a lot of your functions there, between walking and movement, sometimes speech, all kinds of different things. I definitely am not an expert there, so I'm not going to go too much into that. He'll talk a little bit about it, but he got on the right regimen. He is doing well now. He is in a wheelchair, and we're going to talk about kind of that transition, because he's somebody who has not always been disabled. We've talked to a lot of people on this podcast about disability and disability awareness. Everything from people who've been born with a disability or, had it very early in life, all the way up to middle, kind of teenager area. And then obviously with Kim Curry, he had an entire huge career, and then this happened. So I think it was interesting to hear from him about kind of just transitioning in life from, being the kind of the who's who in the world, to having to take a step back and reevaluate, and kind of, it was interesting to talk to him about how him and his wife kind of switched roles. He was out there kind of being the rock star, almost literally, to his wife being the rock star, a little bit more figuratively when it comes to real estate and just doing amazing things there. This is just an awesome conversation. So there's two parts of it. His time as a DJ. We're going to talk about his disability and adapting to that. We're going to talk about the issues with disability in the United States, with assistance and what it'll pay for and what it won't, and accessibility. We've talked about those type of things before. We're going to get into that too. And then the third part of this conversation, if these two topics are not amazing enough already, which they certainly are, then we're going to talk about him writing several books, one being a memoir Another one being about the Fairness Doctrine, which, of course, as a radio person, we've talked to somebody in the past about this, but it was kind of a law that was back in the 80s that meant, hey, if you're going to have people on your radio station, you're going to have people on your TV station, and they're going to kind of give their views, you got to have somebody on with opposing views to talk about it and balance it out so people are hearing both sides of the argument. In the 80s, that all went away. So, of course, that's how we got kind of the opinion news cycles that we have now. He's going to talk, namely about Rush Limbaugh and how, his radio show started after that. He was able to say whatever he wanted to say, whether you agree with it or whether you don't. There really wasn't a lot of pushback there. He is of the thought that is not that's not a great thing, that we need the Fairness Doctrine back. He wrote a book about it. He actually wrote 2 books about it, one a more factual area and one that he made up the story around it, which both seem really amazing. This really means a lot to him in 2 ways. One, obviously he was a DJ, so he has experience in that world. And then 2, we heard about how it affected his mom in a small town, about this local radio station has changed to nothing but kind of talk radio, opinion radio, and when a huge natural disaster, well, I guess it wasn't natural, but a huge disaster, a fire happened, nobody was on the radio being able to explain to this town what the world was going on because it had been taken over by just syndicated opinion talk. So that kind of was an eye-opening thing to me about how this change truly affected his mom. It truly affected a town, and it's affected a lot of small towns out there. So much we're unpacking this week. Such an awesome conversation. This is a longer conversation, so it needed a longer intro, but I think you're really, really going to enjoy this one. Here is my interview with Kim Curry. I'm here today with Kim Curry. Mr. Curry, how are you?
Hi, Jackson. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. Appreciate you joining me. If you would, just introduce yourself.
It's my pleasure. I'm Kim Curry. Live out here in Colorado in a place called Severance. I am a horse rancher now. We have a horse property out here. I'm a 33-year radio broadcaster. I got started in radio in 1972, a job that my father got me involved in because he was in broadcasting at the time. For 33 years, I traveled around the country in towns like Knoxville, Tennessee, San Antonio, Texas, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. And 25 of the 33 years I was in Miami, Florida. When I first got there, I was the youngest kid there in the 1970s, around 1976. And then by around 1996, 20 years later, I was one of the older guys on the top 40 rhythmic radio dial in Miami. Eventually, I became the program director of that radio station. And not because of anything more than just being able to direct the same staff that was there when I got hired. I just changed a few mindsets, and the radio station had the best success in its history. And then in 2005, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The condition was pretty rampant at the time. It forced me to leave the industry. For 8 years, MS beat me up. I was scared, thought I was going to die. Almost every day, something else was falling apart. And then my doctor changed my medicine and insisted that I take large amounts of vitamin D because my doctor, my genius doctor, believes that there's a connection between vitamin D, the medicine that we take for MS patients. And so eventually my condition leveled off. 8 years of scare turned into 2 or 3 years of kind of wondering, am I really okay? Am I really not getting any worse? And then came the time I had to reinvent myself. So that's when I started writing. I'm now a writer. I've got 3 books out, working on some other ones now. And I do interviews with guys like Jackson.
Yeah, well, have a good day. That was everything, wasn't it?
Good night, everybody. Have a good day.
No, we'll unpack a lot of that. And I want to kind of start at the very beginning. And that is that first, I guess it did turn into a little bit of a job, but what created that passion for radio? It was, I guess, doing a job in a church that no one else wanted, right? Talk a little bit about those early days.
Here's the way this happened. I was a regular high school kid living in my hometown of Canyon City, Colorado, which is about 290 miles south of where I am right now. In 1972, my father, who was a Korean War veteran and had retired from the Navy after 20 years, he had a variety of different jobs after he retired. And one of them was being a news guy, and he did sales also at the only radio station in my hometown of Canyon City. Now, it was the only station in my hometown, but it's not the station the kids listen to. The radio station was playing Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, and we wanted to hear the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. So my dad came home one day and he said, listen, my boss wants to know if you'll babysit for him. And I used to babysit my parents' friends' kids as a high school kid to make money. So I just thought that he wanted me to go babysit his kids. So I went to the radio station under the thought that I was going to pick his kids up and then go babysit them. And at that meeting, the general manager told me he wanted me to babysit the radio station on Sunday mornings between 7 and 10 in the morning, because that's when they played back all the church services from the previous week. All the churches around town would record their services, and the radio station would play them back from 7 till 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, and nobody wanted that job. They needed just a kid, a high school kid, and my dad kind of got me into it. But, there's just something about, being in a radio station, kind of understanding what DJs were, because I was a radio listener. I loved DJs. I thought they were cool. And, so I'm sitting there playing these church services, but every hour I had to go on the radio and say, I actually remember it. The station identification every hour was, this is KRLN, Canyon City, Colorado, the station with the news reputation. And it was that one line when I heard myself in my headphones for the first time doing the legal identification, I thought, that was cool. And that's really what got me started, was that simple station ID. And that I got to do part-time work there at the radio station for a while I was in high school, to the chagrin of all my friends, because they couldn't stand the radio station. And but that's all that got me started, and that's all it took.
I like it. And just the one thing I pull from that, with you keep saying Canyon City, that is not how I thought that was pronounced. It's not spelt like regular Canyon. It's got what is that? Is it a?
It's called a tilde. That's a tilde.
Yeah, I thought it was like
in grammar, that's known as a tilde, and it's an enye in Spanish.
Yeah.
In Spanish, that same tilde gives you an enye, and so it's Canyon as opposed to Cannon City. But that's okay. Believe me, everybody gets that wrong.
I like it. Oh, that's funny. And I like that. That's kind of where your passion started. I talked to another person that was a long time radio DJ. He actually left that and went into voiceover. I want to talk a little bit about leaving later, but same thing, that his dad had gotten him involved. So I think that's kind of a cool thing that you both had that. I like too that just, it created that passion, but I want to kind of get beyond that, because you did a lot since then. And then also right after that, you decided to go to school for it as well. Talk a little bit about that. And then I guess leaving school early to really pursue the passion.
So obviously going to college was my next thought. Actually, when I was in high school, I was a high school trumpet player. And it was always my mother's dream that her son would go to music school and become a high school band teacher. So I went to SCSC. It was Southern Colorado State College in Pueblo, Colorado. And I went there as a music major. But remember, my senior year in high school, I had the taste of the radio bug. So I took broadcasting as my minor. But it wasn't long that the radio classes overtook the music classes. I stopped going to them because I was really having a good time in the radio broadcasting school. And I also, thought I could be a DJ, a real one. So I went and I applied at one of the local top 40 radio stations. There were two at the time in Pueblo. And I auditioned for the number 2 radio station, number 2 top 40 station. And they hired me. But my name is Kim Curry. And believe me, I've taken a lot of grief in my life about being named Kim, especially in the 70s. There weren't that many men in America named Kim. So on the day that I got hired, I was in the production room with the program director, the guy who hired me, and then the voiceover guy, the guy we're going to talk about in a little bit, maybe. The voiceover guy was doing the drops for the radio station. He was doing them for the morning show and for the afternoon show. Now, those drops are very consistent. You've heard them all. Gary Paxton plays all hit music. KKAM, Pueblo. You've heard those things, a zillion of them. But the program director didn't want to do Kim Curry. He wasn't going to put a Kim on the radio. So he looked over at a record that was on the side of a turntable. And he looked at it and he said, okay, your name will be Gary Paxton. And he threw the record down. Well, the record was The Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett. But that song was written by a guy by the name of Gary Paxton, who later in life you'll know is the guy who married Tammy Faye Baker after she got divorced from Jim Baker. But never mind, I won't get into it. So my first radio name was Gary Paxton. So that's how I went from Kim Curry at the original radio station in Canyon City, my hometown, nobody cared, and it was a very old style radio station, to the top 40 station where they called me Gary Paxton. So I spent 2.5 years there in college going to radio classes and practicing all the time so that my one day a week on the weekend, I could be as good as I possibly could on a top 40 radio station. And then what happens after a while when you're a radio DJ, all you want to do is get out there. You know, I spent 2.5 years going to school. I practiced. I thought I was finally good enough to get a real radio job. So I sent tapes all across America. I got a couple of bites. Guys called me and had some interest, but didn't call me back. And then I got a call from Knoxville, Tennessee. A radio station known as 15Q called and offered me my first full-time radio job. And so as I'm driving across the country, Jackson, I remember this because it was distinct in my mind. I'm thinking I can't be Kim Curry on the radio. I don't want to be Gary Paxton. And I'm going to be on the radio at 10 o'clock at night. And it was the 1970s. Remember, 1973, 4, 5. So I thought I'm going to be on the radio at 10 o'clock at night. So I'll call myself Night Smoke. So I'm driving across the country hearing all these other radio DJs as I'm driving out to my first full-time job. And I'm thinking, I'm better than these guys. These guys aren't that good. And I'm listening to stations in Memphis, Oklahoma City. And so I'm thinking, I've got a real advantage here. I think I can do this in my first full-time job. And I'm going to call myself Night Smoke. So I drive up to the radio station and I walk up the porch. And I open the door, and there's a lady sitting at the receptionist desk, and there's a big fat guy behind her with curly hair and a Hawaiian shirt on. And I put my hand out to the lady, and I said, "Hello, ma'am. I'm your new nighttime disc jockey. I'm Night Smoke." And the guy says, "Well, if it isn't Kid Curry." And I said, "I hate that name, Kid Curry." And the reason I hated it, because there was a TV show. I don't know if you know the movie Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. That was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Well, ABC Television did a TV show in the early 70s called Alias Smith and Jones, and it was a takeoff of the Butch Cassidy movie. And they called their characters Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry. So because my name was Kim Curry in high school, my friends made a joke all the time. "Hey, if it isn't Kid Curry," and so I hated that name. Yeah. And so when he said, "Well, if it isn't Kid Curry," I said, "I hate that name." And he says, "Well, I'm not going to sign your check." He was the boss. Yeah. And I said, "Well, Kid Curry it is." And little did I know that was the smartest thing I could have ever done. I was very much a young voice guy. I didn't have, as you can tell now, it's not a deep voice. Back in the 70s, all the radio DJs had big, deep voices. Well, I didn't have one. I sounded like a kid. So that's why the guy said, "Well, we're going to call you Kid Curry." Well, that particular act, the Kid Curry act, actually made me famous. From there, I went down to Miami only 6 months later and got hired off a tape that I had just sent to, again, you know, I was very comfortable at my first full-time job. And I thought, well, gee, if I can do it here, I can do it other places. So I started sending out tapes across the country again. And I got a job offer from Miami, Florida. And I went down there, and I was only there for about, I don't know, a year before that radio station got fined, and the boss got fired because they had done an illegal radio contest years prior. And it's a very famous radio contest. If you've ever studied broadcasting, this is actually in the broadcasting study books. It was called the Find Greg Austin in the Bermuda Triangle case. The 96X, the radio station I went down there to work for, a couple of years earlier had did this thing where they went in the newscast and they said that their DJ was lost out in the Bermuda Triangle. Well, they just did that as a joke. But people actually got in their boats and started heading out to the Bermuda Triangle to try to find this guy. So it was an illegal contest. It should have never been done. People were endangered. And eventually they shut that radio station off. And the FCC rarely does that. So I got there about the time that court case was hitting the courts. So about a year after I'm there, the boss gets fired. All the other DJs start leaving. And I'm thinking, I've got to find another job. So I start sending out tapes. Well, I didn't realize at the time that the competition, the guy on the other top 40 station, there were two, and actually those two stations are still there in one form or another. The two primary top 40 radio stations in Miami were Y100 and 96X. But Y100 at that time was the first radio station in America to give away $50,000 cash prizes. And they did it over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. So I never thought I'd work at Y100 because they were the best top 40 radio station in America at the time on the FM dial. If you go back long enough, there was a time when FM was only a bunch of hippies smoking dope, playing, album rock. Well, then eventually top 40, that format went on to FM radio. And the biggest contest in America at that time on FM between top 40 stations was between Y100 and 96X. But I didn't think I was good enough to be on Y100. So little did I know, as my boss gets fired, all these other DJs start scattering around the country. I'm looking for a job. And then I get a call one night from the competition, the guy I was on the radio against at Y100. And he says, I'm leaving here. I'm going up to Boston. And Tanner, the program director, wants to hire you to take my place. And so suddenly I had gone from 96X, which was, again, this was the biggest FM top 40 radio battle in America at the time. People were watching it like crazy. There were news stories all the time in trade magazines about this contest. And I went there on the number 2 station, and suddenly a year later, I'm on the number 1 station. I'm on the radio station giving away the $50,000 cash prizes. I'm on the radio station whose program director is best friends with KC of the Sunshine Band. And remember, at that time, all those hits you think about now, Get Down Tonight, That's the Way I Like It, Boogie Shoes, all those songs were started out of Y100 because our program director and KC were best friends. And because of that connection, the Bee Gees were always in the radio station. Michael Jackson's mother would come to visit Bill Tanner. It was full of superstars. So it was very much a show business radio station. And Y100 at that time was absolutely the biggest education I could have gotten. To work for a guy like Jerry Clifton at 96X, who was also and still is a legend in the business, to learn from him, and then a year later to learn from the number 1 guy in Miami, it was an education that solidified my career. Kid Curry. There is no other radio guy named Kid Curry. There never was. There's a whole bunch of guys out there named Bill Tanner and Robert Walker and Steve Martin, but there was only one Kid Curry, and it was me, because I was the guy who identified with the voice. It was the act nobody else could do. And so it was really a good thing for me to go to Miami. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And then years later, I became the program director of what was 96X that I went to work for. Remember, I told you they shut it off? Well, eventually the FCC turned it back on. It was on the frequency 96.3 when I was there in the beginning. When I took over as program director, by then it had come back on. They turned it back on and put it on the frequency 96.5. So I was the program director and actually worked a couple of times for Power 96 is what they call it now, at frequency 96.5.
You want to talk about some of the things that you did once you became a program director? I think you did some groundbreaking things, and I also wonder too. You talked about just how amazing the Y100 was and that competition. Now you just went back to the other radio station that had been off the air for a long time, so obviously it had lost probably a lot of its followers. Were you able to get back into that competition and be much of a competition for Y100?
Well, I can tell you that these names that I'm mentioning, Bill Tanner and Jerry Clifton, and we're talking top 40 rhythmic radio in Miami. Those two guys have basically controlled the market. When I was at Y100 in the very beginning, the first time I went to work for Bill Tanner. But by the time I came back to Miami, the FCC had turned Power actually 96.5 back on, and Bill was now the program director at Power 96. So I came back. I was at Y100 for a while, the first time in the 70s. And then I wanted to go become a program director. So I went out to San Antonio, Texas, and tried to be a program director out there at a couple stations and failed miserably. By this time, Tanner had left Miami for a while and went to Washington, D.C. So he all of a sudden hires me to come to Washington, D.C. because he wanted to put on Y100 in Washington, D.C. Now, you can well imagine that the style of the guys, the long-haired hippies in Miami who had made Y100 so famous, to pick us up and put us in Washington, D.C. Yeah, John Kluge, who at the time owned it eventually became Fox. Okay. So John Kluge is the guy who hired Bill and paid him like $1 million to drop this radio station in Washington, D.C. because they believed they could take over the top 40 market in Washington, D.C. But it's a different feel. I mean, the beach is what Y100 was based on. And politics is what Washington, D.C. is based on. And so we really never caught on very well in Miami. And eventually we all got dismissed and we all ended up back in Miami eventually. But I want to tell you something that happened to me in Washington, D.C. that I tell you about my multiple sclerosis. You know, it didn't just appear in me. I had what they call exacerbations my whole life. I just didn't know what they were. When I was in San Antonio being a failed program director, I thought I'd been bitten by fire ants one time because I got very sick. My arm curled up and my toes curled, and I had this vision thing I couldn't see, and I felt my brain was on fire. But I thought I just bitten by fire ants because I'm in Texas. I must have got bitten by a fire ant. It went away, but it was a week I was down. So then you fast forward to Washington, D.C., another maybe year, two years later. And this is just kind of weird. I'm going to try to set this whole thing up for you. Being the nighttime DJ Kid Curry, my job was to attract the high school and middle school audience for the radio station. That was me. I did everything I could. I was in high school pep rallies. I went to education days. Went to become student teachers. I did everything I could to win that audience. And at night on my radio show, in the last 10 minutes, I would do a segment called Bed Check, where I'd let kids just call in and say whatever they wanted to say. They could rip on a teacher. They could call a student friend names. They could rip on their brother, their mother. They could say whatever they wanted to, and I would fire back at them. And then at the end of that particular feature, I would say, "Come get me, mother. I'm through." So I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm supposed to be winning the nighttime audience. But the nighttime audience is not a teenage audience. My Bed Check, which was designed for kids, got taken over by the adults who wanted to talk politics. And it wasn't very fun. And I would be picking up the phone and there would be a comment about a political party. And I'm like, I'm not talking about that. I want high school kids. I get real mad about it. And then one night, I picked up the phone and this guy says, "Hello, my name is Frank DeFramer. I'm over here at the White House, and the president was just in my office listening to your Bed Check, and he thinks you're funny." And I just went, ha, 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 and I hung up because I thought it was a prank call. The next night, same thing. hey, guess what? Mr. Reagan was just in my office. He says, hello. I'm like, yeah. And I just hung up, and I kept hanging up for about a week, maybe 2 weeks went by, until one night he called and I stopped my show because it was a recorded thing because I had to edit everything over. And so I stopped him and I said, hang on a second. Who are you? What is this bit? You keep telling me the president's in your office. Who is Frank DeFramer? He says, well, my name is Frank, and I'm the guy who takes care of all the frames in the White House. Someone has to do the maintenance on those big portraits that you see, and that's my job. I'm Frank DeFramer. And when I tell you that the president was in my office listening to your bed check, I was serious. Whoa. I thought, man, that is awesome. So a couple of years go by. I leave Washington, D.C., and now Tanner has gone back to Miami. I haven't yet gone back. I didn't necessarily want to leave the Northeast. I had just gotten up in Washington, D.C. I was enjoying the history. I wanted to stay in the area. So when Tanner went back to Miami, I went over to Baltimore, Maryland. I'm over there on B104, and I'm on the radio for maybe a year. My girlfriend at the time says, my grandma's coming to visit from Texas. So grandma's over at the house, and we're having dinner. And the story about my bed check comes up, and Frank DeFramer, and she says, well, if you know somebody at the White House, you need to get us a tour. Oh, so I go and I make that call to the White House, and I'm going, is this guy real? No, here we go. So hello, I need to speak to Frank DeFramer. Lady says, oh, Frank, hang on a second. Puts me on hold. And I'm like, what? There really is a Frank DeFramer? Because until then, I had no confirmation. And so he picks up the phone. He said, Frank. I said, Frank, it's Kid Curry. Frank went nuts. Kid, how you doing? What's going on? I haven't talked to you. Sorry you left, because I was on Wash FM. Sorry you left Wash FM. I hear you're in Baltimore. I said, yeah, man, I'm still up here. I'm still in the area, but I've got a girlfriend's grandma wants a tour of the White House. Okay, I'll set you up. You just come on over whenever you're ready. Let me know when you're coming, and I'll tell all the guys in the Secret Service that you're coming, and they'll know you're coming. Just tell them you're with Frank, and they'll get you up here. Okay. So I'm driving around the White House. Now, this is just after the Reagan assassination attempt. There is still no security changes around the White House. So I'm driving around looking at roads going into the White House, and I see one that looks to me goes right up to the side of the house. So I start driving up to this place. And at that point, my life nearly changed forever. The Secret Service started coming at my car with guns, everything. They were running out of everywhere, and they're coming up on my car, and I'm going, wait. And I stopped the car. But at the time, remember I said my arm would curl up and my feet would curl up and I get this pain in my head. All of that happened as I'm stopping the car. And so as I try to get out to talk to the Secret Service to tell them I'm okay, I roll out of the car because I'm having a seizure, a MS seizure. And I'm going, it's Kid Curry. I'm here for Frank DeFramer. As I'm falling out of the car, and they're like, hey, kid, what's up? And I was like, oh, my God. I thought I was going to get shot by the Secret Service at the White House. So that's just one example of what multiple sclerosis has done to me in my life, and I didn't even know what it was. And I can now tell you that when I got diagnosed in 2005, my doctor, Dr. Calagua in Miami, felt that she realized that MS is a stress-related disease. When you've got a radio show and you're Kid Curry and you're a pretty important radio DJ in America, I worked constantly on my show. It was always on my mind. I never turned it off. And then when you become the program director of the radio station, not only are you concerned about that show that you're on, but you're worried about everybody else's radio show. So there's an element of stress that is connected to multiple sclerosis. And what happened when I'm driving up to the White House and those guns are coming at me, suddenly stress hits me. I'm having a huge exacerbation and my muscles curl up and I roll out of the car. I didn't know what it was. They're telling me, hey, can we get you a wheelchair? I'm like, get the wheelchair for the old lady. I'll be okay. So, but that was something that was happening that I didn't even know once again until that was 1986, maybe 85. And until 2005, I wasn't even diagnosed. So these things were happening to me as I was living my life.
Yeah.
And like I said, eventually I made it back down to Miami.
Yeah. And I think it's important kind of to note that, you talked about how you thought it was fire ants, or you thought it was this, or you thought it was that. It's really easy, and a lot of people do try to just kind of explain symptoms away. I mean, I have some, my grandmother actually has MS. She was diagnosed in 1999, and she talked about how, for 20 years before that, there'd be times that she would just like get so tongue tied she couldn't talk. She just thought that she was just getting nervous, like she didn't know what was going on. So she explained that away for so long until one time she literally just couldn't talk for a long period of time, and she had a brain scan, and she was diagnosed with MS. So I think it's kind of a big thing there when it comes to just knowing your body and realizing that when something's wrong, don't try to explain it away, because it would probably be beneficial to get things checked. So I think that's a huge thing for sure.
When I was younger, though, Jackson, I was like, I was a tough guy. I'll be all right. Right. But by 2005, I'm sorry if this shocks people, but my third wife says to me, wait a minute, we got to get you fixed. We need to get you to the doctor. Actually, I was at home here in Colorado in 2004, visiting my mother at the same time of that big tsunami that we'd never seen anything like that on television. You could see areas get wiped out, people floating out in the ocean. And I was watching this tsunami coverage on television, and my mother starts looking at me and she says, there's something wrong with you. Your face is messed up. I can see your eye is drooping. And I told her, I said, Mom, I'm under stress. I've got the biggest radio station in Miami. I'm watching this tsunami thing, and what you're seeing is stress. And she said, no, there's really something wrong with you. And it was my mother who convinced my wife to get me into the doctor, because I don't know if I just would have kept going, it's just something. But there did come a time in 2004 that these things that were happening to me did not stop. I couldn't walk straight. I'd walk down the hallways of my office and have to hold my hands out so I could go down the middle. And my staff was concerned, and I was losing vision in my right eye. So it was time, so it took about a month, maybe 6 weeks for the test. Testing for multiple sclerosis takes a long time. They stick you with needles and do electronic stimulation and all sorts of blood tests. And eventually I took the MRIs, which show the lesions in the brain. And then one of the things they also want to see is a certain enzyme in your spine, your spinal fluid, which was torturous for me because unfortunately I didn't realize at the time, because I was just being diagnosed and they're trying to figure this out. I didn't have much spinal fluid. How would I know? Until the doctor goes in, she says, and my actual doctor, Dr. Calagua, is going to go give me the spinal tap to get to collect the fluid. And she punches in and then stops and pulls out and says, I'm getting nothing. I'm going to get somebody else. So she goes and gets another doctor. So it takes me about an hour to get over this one thing in the first place. And then I got to get ready for the next one. And so the doctor says, try this again, lean up. And he spikes me and they got nothing. And he's like, oh, I'm not getting anything. I don't know what's going on here. Then my doctor says, well, we'll bring in the spinal tap specialist because apparently there is a guy like that. So they bring this guy in, and now I've already had 2 spinal taps. And now I'm going to endure my 3rd spinal tap in one day. And he gets nothing. And then they're like, we've got to find this spinal fluid. So they put me actually under an X-ray machine to locate the spinal fluid. And then they found it that way. So in one day, I endured 4 spinal taps, took about 8 hours for the process. So it was, but again, that was what they needed to have to get the diagnosis correct. So,
yeah. All right. Well, I want to ask you too, because we've kind of jumped to the MS diagnosis and that is kind of what made you leave the radio world. I want to ask you just I guess from a mental health perspective, what was it like first getting this diagnosis is a major thing, a huge life event, but then also it kind of putting an abrupt end to a career that was still booming, and then one that I'm sure that you enjoyed quite a bit. So what was that like?
So as Kid Curry, the DJ, And I said 3 wives. Part of the problem, and I've been married now 22 years, so I'm good now, okay? But in my younger radio DJ life, part of the problem being Kid Curry was the girls really liked Kid Curry. And, so people have always paid attention to this DJ. And I talk about him in the third person because he is. It's just, to me, it was an act. I was just really good at it. And so Kid Curry was the kind of guy people wanted to be around. And then when Kid Curry became the program director of Power 96, now we're talking Miami, Florida radio. It's like Hollywood in California, only it's in Miami. So being the program director of this very famous radio station and bringing it to heights that it had never seen before made me very famous. Everybody wanted to be next to Kid Curry. But you know what? When Kid Curry has to go to a crutch because Kid Curry can't walk straight, and then the doctor says, well, actually it was a cane, the first one. Then I got into crutches. And then I ended up in a wheelchair. You know what you find out is people don't want to be next to Kid Curry. It was quite a mental situation that I can tell you that took a long time for me to get over. I was a fairly famous, well-received person for my whole career. And suddenly, because of my disease, because of my body falling apart, nobody wanted to pay attention to me anymore. And it was very distressing. It took 8 years or so as my condition was failing. That beat me up. Along with my condition going down, I was mentally dealing with the fact that I'd gone from this career that I loved, that my dad got me started in. I was having huge success. I've been interviewing for jobs in Los Angeles at the time I got diagnosed. And this screeching halt thing was not very easy to deal with. And I can tell you that if not for my wife, my wonderful wife, I would have had a real problem. But she finally convinced me to not be so mad about being in the wheelchair. Because I'm just angry that I can't do the things that I want to do. I can't empty the trash. Okay. I can't well, you can imagine I'm in a wheelchair. There's a whole lot of damn things I can't do. Now I am the chef in my house, and I do cook from my wheelchair. I prepare all my dishes. I got a chair that lifts me up and down, and I cook for my wife and myself and my daughter, who lives next door to us in our apartment on the other side of the property. But it was a real mental thing. And I can tell you that I don't know, if it hadn't been for my wife, I don't know if I would have been able to mentally deal with it. But she kept encouraging me to realize that when you get better, you can go back to work. Now that we've stopped your degradation, your body's not being beat up anymore. Let's get you back to work. But it had been about 8-10 years. And a guy radio is quick. The entertainment business is in and out. You're famous one day and not famous the next. Songs a hit one day and it's not a hit the next day. And so I've realized that there's no way I could ever get back in the business. But I wanted to tell my story. I wanted to tell my story. I wanted to write the history of the Kid Curry radio show, how it started, what I went through, the people that I met, the incredible artists who became good personal friends, Cyndi Lauper, Gene Simmons. I could go on. Casey of the Sunshine Band, Barry Gibb, the Gibb brothers, these are my friends. Wyclef Jean. As my career continued, remember I was playing Casey of the Sunshine Band in 1976. By the time I retired in 2005, I was playing Puff Daddy, Tupac, and all these other artists. So my genre, my mental state is to stay within 18 to 34-year-old age group, because that's how I directed my radio stations. And it's still in my head. I still feel very, very young. I don't feel like a very old guy. So I wanted to tell my story. It's why I wrote my memoir, which I entitled "Come Get Me, Mother, I'm Through," which was my tagline at the end of my feature. And it talks about the Kid Curry radio show, about a lot of the great things I got to do in the cities that I worked in. And then it talks about the multiple sclerosis diagnosis. And it talks specifically about how it costs to be disabled in America. I have a wheelchair that my insurance company gives me. It's a motorized wheelchair. It's on the second floor. It's on the main floor of my house right now. I'm on the third floor. In order for me to get from one floor to another, I have a $30,000 chair lift that I sit in, and it takes me from level to level. Each level has a wheelchair on it. Now, the only wheelchair that has been paid for is the first one, the one that the insurance company gave me. The other wheelchair downstairs on the first floor and up here on the third floor, and that stair lift that gets me from level to level, and the lift that it takes to get me out to my garage, and the other lift it takes to get me out to my backyard, probably in excess of $70,000, all paid for by me. If I didn't pay for it, I wouldn't leave my house. And there's a certain political party who's taken all of my tax breaks away. It used to be when you were disabled in America and you had to buy these things, you got some tax breaks, but they've taken all those away from us now. So it costs to be disabled in America. There's no reason for that. It's only because of people who make a lot of money and they don't want to help guys like me. So it's pretty disturbing to me. And that's why it's a pretty important part of the book. And it's probably the main reason why I wanted to write the book. Yeah, I wanted to talk about my career and everything. I wanted to talk about the MS diagnosis. But the reality is anybody could end up where I am at any time in their life. And I know people, you know people who have had one day fine and the next day they're not. And we all end up in the same place, disabled, needing medical help, and paying out of our pockets for something we shouldn't have to pay for. And it is the worst medical system in the world because we're the ones that pay the highest costs and get nothing for it. So that's my personal opinion. And that's why I wrote the book. So
yeah. And I've had several people that are, disability advocates, and they say exact thing you're saying. And then also kind of a further point, and I wonder exactly your thoughts with it, is just we have a huge accessibility problem too. It's kind of an afterthought a lot of times in most of the world, and a lot of things that you think are accessible are just not. So I think that's a huge issue too. What do you feel about accessibility?
Well, I live in a town that's been here for 100 and some years. It still has an old town feel downtown, and there are many stores I can't get into. And that bothers me. I can go through the back door. In fact, there are many restaurants here where I have to go through the kitchen just to get in to sit down and have a meal. Mm-hmm. So I don't like it. I get very distressed when I see people who don't have placards on their car to parking in handicap spots. This is a real issue that needs to be cured in America, needs to be fixed, because remember, the guys who are voting for us to try to get us some relief and give disabled people relief have the best health care on the planet, and they don't care. They don't care about us. So it's very distressing. The accessibility part, as a matter of fact, I had moved in before we lived on the ranch where I live now. We lived over in Loveland, Colorado, in a brand new development. And I had called the city at one point because there were no wheelchair drop-offs. I would have had to go all the way around, almost a quarter of a mile around the sidewalks, cross the street, down another sidewalk just to get to my mailbox. And I called the city of Loveland. I said, I don't know if this is something you need to look at or what, but I would sure like some help. Well, the next day, they came out to start making arrangements. They actually came and reconstructed the sidewalk on the corner of my house so I could take my wheelchair across. They actually had to reconstruct over by the mailboxes because they had to bring the wheelchair accessibility on that side. So I complained to the city of Loveland about not having any accessibility, and they came the next day, and within a month and a half, it was done. So kudos to the city of Loveland, Colorado. It would be nice if every city could respond that way. But my city, named Loveland, said that they're prepared for that. They leave that in their budget. So I really have to give them props. They leave things, if they have money in the budget to fix things like this, that's a good town. So I really like Loveland, Colorado. I don't live there now anymore. I'm out in Severance, about 11 miles away, but I'm still a big fan of Loveland.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kudos to Loveland. The last thing I want to say about this there, because I've had a lot of people on it, talking about disability advocacy. And just in case people are listening, and this is the only one that they've checked out, I think another issue when it comes to this is, and it sounds like you're fortunate and blessed not to necessarily have this issue, but the way that our laws are set up, at least from what I've heard, is really kind of, if people want help and people want to have government assistance on having a caretaker, government assistance on a lot of things, kind of keeps people poor. Like, you're not able to get that and still try to provide for yourself when it comes to a job. It's kind of, you either get help or you don't. So I think that's kind of a huge issue too.
It really is. And fortunately, I am fortunate that my wife has demanded, since, some relationships don't survive something like this. Mm-hmm. When you're diagnosed with a chronic disease, sometimes partners run. My wife never stepped back. She has insisted that she does everything that she does for me so that I can live a normal life. I drive with hand controls. I have a wheelchair in my car. I have a wheelchair I'm sitting in now. I'm on the 3rd floor. Remember the wheelchair on the 1st floor? She had to buy that. She's the one who I really depend on here, because here's something that happened, Jackson. We haven't talked about it. I went from being the real. I was the guy in my house. I was the moneymaker, and it was fairly large because I was well taken care of. All my companies took very good care of me financially. And then suddenly, if it weren't for the office manager in Miami, who had me sign a long-term disability form that I didn't know I even signed, I don't know what I would have done to even have any income. But fortunately, I signed a long-term insurance policy. So when I resigned from my company and I moved out back home to Colorado when I was diagnosed with MS, because all I could think of was, I got to go home. I want to be with my mom. My mom is still here. She's passed since then, but she was here in 2005. I felt if I needed some help, I could ask my high school friends. A bunch of them still living in my hometown. So I resigned and then came back here to Colorado. So what's happened is my wife and I brought all our money out here in 2005 and decided we would fix and flip houses. We bought a couple of homes and we repaired them and we sold them. But during that process, my wife didn't like the way the real estate companies were taking care of her. So she came home one day and said, you know what? I don't like these guys. I'm going to go get my license and I'm going to become a real estate agent. A year later, she had her license. A year after that, she was setting records in the state of Colorado per capita in house sales in this town. She sold 128 houses in 1 year. So then that really got the attention of my wife's corporate office. She works for Keller Williams. And now my wife is an international real estate coach with clients all around the world. And she talks to them. In fact, she works 7 a.m. till 5, 4 days a week, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a new client every 30 minutes, talking about how to make the real estate company they have a better place. So this whole thing that's happened to me has completely changed my wife. She is now the leader of the band. She is the breadwinner in my house. And we have really, I knew, when I met her, she was working for a financial institution. Prior to that, she was working in family law. I knew she was a smart woman, but when I married her, she basically was the lady who told me what time I got to get to this thing, where to go for this. She was my secretary almost, because Kid Curry was a very busy guy. But when I got diagnosed and they're all switched off, my wife became the leader. And I'm telling you, this has been quite the road for the two of us, thinking for years that I was going to die because of the way my condition was failing, and then coming back from that and trying to find a new me at the same time while my wife is redesigning her life. And now, like I said, I've become a horse rancher. I live on a big horse property out here in Colorado, and we have horses in the barn, and it's a pretty different life than I was living a few years ago. So
certainly,
but it's all because of my wife.
And I love to hear that you sound like you guys have made a good team. It was kind of a tag team. Tag, you're it, and she took off running. So I love to hear that. And I want you now to kind of transition into your books. You talked about the memoir already. You've got a few other books. One of them was a topic that I was going to ask you about, but it's a large topic, so I don't know whether we can dive into it or not. But the other person I talked to that was, 40 years in the radio business talked about the same thing and how radio changed completely, back in the 80s, and it was more politics like you talked about. So I think one of your books has a little bit to do with that, but tell us a little bit about the three books that you have.
Okay, here's the thing. My dad got me started in radio. I took off on my radio career. My dad stayed there in our hometown. Remember, it was one radio station, and it was his. He loved it. The town loved that radio station. And then in 1987, President Ronald Reagan vetoed the Fairness in Broadcasting Act. Inside that act was a thing known as the Fairness Doctrine. Now, that was the rule that required equal time for contrasting points of view. In other words, if someone went on the radio in before 1987, and they lied, you as a citizen had the right to go to that radio or TV station and demand equal time to call that lie out or give disinformation and correct the disinformation. It was your legal right to do so. But in 1987, President Reagan he said that he believed that rule was against the rights given in the First Amendment of the right of free speech. But what you really do when you take away the contrasting points of view comments, what you then do is you let lies perpetuate without comment, and lies build up. And it actually gave Rush Limbaugh, the very famous radio guy. I remember when his show first started. I was a radio DJ, man. If I could have come up with something that would have made people listen to my radio show every day for longer periods of time, I would have loved that. That's what our radio DJ thing is. Well, Rush Limbaugh realized after this 1987 law was rescinded, he realized that if he came up with all these things, all these misinformation, people would start to want to listen to it, and they would gather. So the more lies, the more disinformation, the more questions he brought up about things he just didn't like, the more audience he collected. And he did this without anybody stopping him and being able to call him out as a liar. So President Reagan did this to us in 1987. Now, my dad stayed in my hometown. And like I said, I'm going around the country. I'm doing my radio show. I come home and my dad would say things like, well, they fired Al Madrill and they brought on some syndicated talk show and all they do is lie. And then I'd come back the next time. My dad said, well, they fired old Kafka. They brought on some syndicated show and all that guy does is lie. And so this thing that was happening to my hometown and to my dad's radio station sat in my head my whole life. It bothered me that my dad's radio station was kind of destroyed by the decision by Ronald Reagan, and it affected, my dad kept saying, it's affecting the town, Kim. Everybody's believing this bullshit, and I think it's going to destroy our town. So my dad kept telling me this when I would come home, but it was just a story that sat in my head. So then I get diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. My father passes away. I'm living now in my hometown. My mom is still alive. And the whole point that my dad would say is they're listening to these lies. That's all they're going to listen to. And that's all the radio station wants to do because they're making money. They don't care what the people think anymore. And they stopped doing the local newscast. They took off all the local guys on the radio. Remember, it was one radio station, so everybody knew everybody on the radio station until they all got fired and replaced with these syndicated people who flaunted the fact that there was no fairness doctrine. So now I'm living in my hometown. My mom is not listening to the station anymore. They're not doing anything locally. And then a fire breaks out at the Royal Gorge. There's a tourist trap in my hometown in Canyon City. At the time, it was the world's tallest suspension bridge. From the floor of the Arkansas River to the very top of the bridge was well over 1,000 feet, and it was the tallest divide. It was the biggest divide of a bridge in the world. There's one in China now that's taller. But a fire breaks out at this place. And this fire is intense. The wind is blowing. It's a typical winter in Colorado, and the wind is blowing. The flames are going crazy, and the flames actually jumped over the canyon, and there was so much smoke coming in, it covered up the town. I knew what was going on because I was on social media, and I knew, but my mother called. And she's screaming, and she says, how come the radio station isn't telling us what's going on? They're not saying anything. They've got these syndicated liars on, and where's that smoke coming from? Am I going to die? Where's the fire? And that kind of stuck in my head too, because that's what happened. Everybody in town stopped listening unless if you didn't like the corruption on the radio, you weren't listening, you didn't care. So the radio station basically gave up on listeners like my mom, and it was more important for them to play these because they never interrupted their broadcasting while this fire was going on. They never said anything. And that's the whole point of a radio station, and especially in a small town, give information. My mother was desperately trying to find out. So years go by, and it sits in my head as I'm writing my memoir. I'm telling the story of my MS and my belief that it costs to be disabled in America. I get the book done, but I'm still in the writer's mode. I want to write some more. So I sat back and one day and I thought about this story. I thought, wait a minute. What if I wrote this story about what happened to a small American town and its only radio station after Ronald Reagan rescinded the Fairness Doctrine in 1987. And I basically told the story of what happened, that everybody that was local was on the radio and the town loved it. All those guys went away. They started broadcasting the syndicated stuff that my mom didn't like. Nobody the radio station only was concerned about those who liked that kind of radio and that kind of talk, didn't care about my mom. A fire breaks out. She tunes in to try to find out what's going on. And these guys are so into their syndicated broadcast, they're not telling anybody about the disaster that's happening in front of them. So that's the story that I wrote. And I sent the book off to a company called Tailflick. Tailflick goes through, they read the story, and they look at its viability into maybe making it a TV show or a movie. And the Tailflick people wrote me back, got very in-depth in the story, and they said, you've got a really good line here. This is a good story, but we need more character development. As a matter of fact, I'm going to hold the different stories up. Here's the thickness of The Death of Fairness, the book that I'm talking about, and here's the thickness of the second story. So what I did was, when they told me I needed a deeper story, I needed more character development, I redid the story, and I wrote it in a YA form, a young adult form, because I believe if anybody's going to be able to fix America, it's going to be kids who are between 18 to 34 years old who finally realize they have the voting power to get whatever they want if they would just get out and vote. And what I believe everybody wants is truth. So my second book on that topic is Bonnie's Law, The Return to Fairness. Little Bonnie realizes the depths of Mr. Reagan's mistake and eventually ends up as a senator in her state and tries to pass a new fairness doctrine to try to bring truth and trust back to America. And it fails by one vote because the other party's in charge. And it makes her want to go become president. So she files, in fact, the last page is her filing to become president, to run for the office of president so she can bring back the Fairness Doctrine. I really believe in truth and trust. I really don't believe that Ronald Reagan knew what he was doing. I don't believe he would want the division in America that we have today. I don't think he did it for the reasons he said he did it. Because as you research hard enough, he told everybody this is antagonistic to the rights given in the First Amendment. But if you research hard enough, you'll find out that the major broadcasting companies of the day were complaining that giving equal time was taking away from their bottom line, because there were so many liars and so many people that were giving out disinformation that they had to keep giving all this equal time, and it was affecting their bottom line. Those people got to Ronald Reagan and said, listen, this is a monetary situation for corporations. We need to get rid of this rule. And so he did for them, saying that it was antagonistic to the rights given in the First Amendment. But what you truthfully did was you took away my right to call a liar a liar. You took away my right to give correct information after disinformation. So that's how this thing ended up. And I cannot believe that Mr. Reagan wanted that to happen.
Yeah. Well, I do my best when in this podcast just to present the people I'm speaking with and let people kind of make decisions. I don't give a lot of my own opinion, but what I'll say is, the question for you is do you think that in the world that we have now, because I had someone on, oh goodness, a couple months ago who actually retired from the White House press corps because of this, pretty much this exact issue about, division, truth, fairness, being able to call out things when it's not necessarily accurate. He retired in 2018. So I'll let you kind of figure out exactly what his issues were and the problems he was having as a media person at that time. I wonder if you think this is something that, with the division we have now, is something that we ever could truly solve. I hope so.
Well, here's the truth. After they finally had to come up with a new regulation, and they came up with Section 230. Section 230, it simply does one thing. It takes away the responsibility of the internet. They are not held responsible for content. Internet, what Section 230 says is the entity is not responsible for the content. The entity is not responsible for the content. Now that's Section 230. Could you change that through legislation? You absolutely could. You could change that in a second. Make the entities responsible for the misinformation. And you know what would happen? All the lies would disappear because they don't want to give up their money. If you brought back and forced them to give equal time, the liars would disappear because they don't want to give in to the money. So, and no one wants to take away anybody's right to speak. All I want to do is have the right to be able to call out disinformation and lies when they are. And that's why Section 230 is the new devil. And yes, you could change it because it's simple legislation. In fact, that's what my friend Bonnie here in this book does. She figures out the legislation and gets it all the way to a 50-50 vote, but it was beaten by the vice president. So there is a way to do this. It's very simple. It's not hard. But what you can do is you can only get young people involved to try to change it, because the older people are getting money from lobbyists. And and by the way, I believe that it's important to give both sides. But there is certainly one side in this issue, one political side, that has taken advantage of this fact that there is no fairness doctrine. And every time you bring up the possibility of the return of the Fairness Doctrine, and it does come up every 2 or 3 years, they squelch it. The other party that doesn't want it squelches it because they've had the advantage because of it. Now, how do you change that? You get young people to realize, get young people to read the book, realize, you know what? You can change this. It's legislation. It's all it is. So you get a bunch of young people, young Gen Zers or whatever the case may be, who are serious about running the country and serious about trying to pull America back from a very serious brink, because you don't know how this is going to end. I don't know how this is going to end. This is pretty desperate in our country right now. And it will take legislation to get it done.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good kind of stopping point. There's just so much that we could talk about. I don't think that we could, I don't think we can truly do your entire story justice in just an hour, but I want you to tell people how they can find you, how they can find these books if they do want to hear a lot more about Kim Curry, and then also, just about the Fairness Doctrine and the 2 books you've written around it.
Jackson, I want to thank you for having me here. I do a lot of these interviews, and this was a very comfortable interview. You were very well prepared. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm available at krcurry.com. That's my website. My book, Bonnie's Law, The Return to Fairness, is featured there because it was an Amazon #1 bestseller. Woo-hoo.
Yeah.
So you can find that out. You can find out all the information about my memoir, I've got other blogs up there. As a matter of fact, Jackson, when you're done with this and you decide to publish yours, I will put it on my website too, if you'd like, because I promote other people's stuff when I do these things. But krcurry.com. I'm at krcurry, the author, on Facebook and Instagram. I try to stay away from social media, but I'm not very good at it. So
I got you. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jackson. My pleasure too.
So that was Kim Curry. What a guy. What an amazing conversation. Learned so much from him. One thing in editing this that I learned is, man, what a great radio voice. I listen to myself and think, oh my gosh, I sound nothing compared to Kid Curry and that crisp, clear, smooth radio voice. But you're stuck with me every week in the voice that I do have. Luckily, I always get to talk to an amazing, interesting person, and they do most of the talking, so you don't got to hear this. But I learned so much this week. Between his career in radio, his struggles in MS, and where he is now with it, learning about the world of navigating our system, our laws, and our accessibility issues, navigating just his own personal changes in life when it comes to being that breadwinner, to transitioning to his wife doing that, his transition into writing books that seem pretty amazing as well, the talk about the Fairness Doctrine. This is just an awesome conversation. I urge you to go check out those books. If you do want to check them out, the links to his website are in the show notes. Any other links I can find will be there for him as well. But man, I really enjoyed talking to Kim Curry. Hope you enjoyed it as well. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate you. Please go leave a 5-star review on Spotify and on Apple. Leave a written review on Apple if you haven't already. If you've listened a million times and you haven't done that, this is another reminder to do that. Go follow us on Instagram as well, Not Enough Podcast, on Facebook, Not Enough with Jackson Huff, jacksonhuff.com. A lot of places to check us out. A lot of amazing guests in the past. More than 100 amazing guests in the past. More than 100 hopefully to come. So I really appreciate you following along. Hope to see you next week. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or, hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.